Okay, now I'm going to show you how to prepare a surface, but before I do, let's talk about the size I want you to cut the board. The image in this exercise is going to be 9 by 12 inches with a 1/2 inch border, which means you need to cut the board down to 10 by 13. So this board is 13 across, 10 this way. We're going to tape off a 1/2 inch border once we prepare the surface, and that's going to create a 9 by 12 image. So anytime I ask you to make an illustration that's, let's say, 11 by 14, the board needs to be cut down to 12 by 15. Right? 14 by 17 needs to be cut down to 15 by 18. You always want to leave a little bit of space around the illustration for the frame if you're going to hang it, but usually in illustration you want to create something that's called the bleed, some little area outside the illustration. We'll talk more about that later. That's actually not something we have to worry about in modern illustration. Okay, so this board is cut down to 10 by 13. We're going to start preparing it. But again, before I do, let me quickly show you how to cut this really heavy cardboard with an X-Acto knife. Hopefully I'm not condescending to anybody. I'm not showing anything that's completely obvious that you've seen before. But look, I've had problems with students not cutting their board straight because nobody showed them how to use an X-Acto knife. So I'm going to quickly show you how to do that. The first step is to measure off your surface to whatever size you want. So let's cut this board down. Well, let's just cut it in half. Let's just do that. So I'm going to measure out I don't know, okay, this is 12 and a half. Okay, so 6 1/4 is going to be the halfway point. 6 1/4. You don't necessarily have to pencil off the line, but I think it helps. Okay, now let's cut through this. Here's the most important thing. Don't try to cut through it all at once. You're going to screw up. So you're going to hold your ruler. Make sure it's a metal ruler, not your clear plastic ruler, which is going to get destroyed. Hold your X-Acto knife like a pencil, like this. And let's bring this up a little bit so you can see this. Move this over. There we go. Okay. One stroke, lightly, another stroke, and just keep going over it. This should take maybe 3 to 4 strokes before you start feeling the surface of the cutting board through the X-Acto knife, and boom, it's cut. Okay, so don't hold it like a stabbing instrument, right? Hold it like a pencil, and just be gentle. The thicker the cardboard, the more strokes it's going to take. Okay, and that's it. Try not to cut your fingers when you're holding the ruler. Don't move your thumb past the ruler point. I don't know, just like basic stuff. Okay, so that's how you cut down your boards. Okay, now we can prepare the painting surface. Let's get to it. Okay, I've got my paper cut down to size. Now I'm going to gesso it. By the way, always cut your surface down to the size you want, then apply the gesso. That's really, really important because the gesso is going to help seal the sides of your cardboard and create a more permanent surface. If you cut afterwards, then the sides are going to be exposed, and as you know, cardboard tends to start fraying at the corners, and over time your paper is going to start disintegrating. Okay, so the first step is to pre-mix some gesso. Most important point is that artists very rarely start off working on a white surface. Most often, artists start working on a gray surface or some kind of toned surface. Why is that important? Well, the problem with white is that it messes with your ability to gauge value and ultimately your ability to gauge color correctly. Every color looks a little bit odd, a little bit off against white. It's going to look too dark and a little bit too muddy. By starting off with some kind of neutral mid-tone ground, it allows to gauge your values more accurately, because mid-tone gray is as close to absolutely nothing as you can possibly get when it comes to color. Now, you don't really need a lot of gesso, so this is, I'm like a chef who never measures anything. I'm going to say this is maybe about 2 tablespoons of gesso. For a surface this size, you do not need more. Okay, do not mix a tremendous amount of gesso. It's just going to get wasted. All right, so to tone our gesso, we're going to use a little bit of black. Be careful, black is a strong pigment, so you're going to need a little tiny amount of it in order to get the gray that you want. Add a little bit at a time, and let's mix this and see what it looks like. What we're looking for is about a 50% gray. The exact value, not terribly important, right? So it could be a little bit lighter than 50%, a little bit darker. It's going to have an effect on your final painting, obviously. This is maybe a little bit light, so let's add a little tiny bit more and see what it looks like. So add your paint in little kind of pea-sized amounts, little by little. Liquitex Gesso is pretty much the right consistency out of the tube. I don't know what kind of gesso you're going to buy, but what you want is for the gesso to be the consistency of kind of heavy cream. You want it to move around in your tub a little bit. If it doesn't, add a little tiny bit of water. So depending on the brand of gesso, sometimes it can be really plasticky, really viscous, which is going to prevent you from getting a really smooth surface. Okay, so let's see if you can see this. So it's thick, but not so thick that it doesn't move around. Can you guys see this? Okay, so that means that it's capable of spreading. It's not holding the brushstroke, right? It's not forming stiff peaks, to use another cooking term, right? Okay, now let's apply a coat of gesso. Do not load up your gesso brush. So take a little bit off. We're going to apply one thin coat in a single direction. So it could be vertical, it could be horizontal, it doesn't matter what direction you start with. Just start applying it. If there's any streaks, no worries. No big deal. Right, okay, so mix it enough so that it's more or less uniform, but if it's not perfect, it's not a big deal. We're going to be painting over this. Okay. Now, you have to move pretty quickly. We're covering an unprimed surface right now with the gesso. It's absorbing the gesso a lot. It's sucking the water out of the gesso and making it really tacky and really viscous. So in order to spread it, in order for the brushstrokes to be even, I need to go over them right away, smooth them out. Again, a single direction. Make sure you get the corners. And by the way, I have a piece of paper down because I don't want to mess up. Okay, this is not the table, it's another piece of cardboard. But I want to keep that clean. So put a piece of paper down. Okay, smooth it out as much as you can. Don't worry, this is the first coat, the first of 3. And then keep smoothing it out until you start feeling the paint getting kind of sticky, kind of tacky, at which point you have to stop. Why? Because gesso dries from the top down, and the first thing it does is form a little skin. If I keep going over it while that skin is formed, there's still wet paint underneath. That skin could really easily tear, and then you'll create little kind of sausagey shapes in your painting surface, which is something, I don't know about you, but something that I personally don't want. Okay, that's going to be the first layer. Next step, let this dry. Let this dry completely, because again, if I go over this with another coat while this one's not entirely dry, the gesso can easily tear and again create those kind of sausage shapes. So the easiest thing to do is hit this with a hairdryer, which is what I'm going to do. And when we come back, I'm going to apply a second coat. Now that my first layer is perfectly dry, I'm going to apply a second coat in a different direction. So this time I'm going to apply it diagonally. Now you will notice that the second coat applies much more smoothly, much more quickly. Why? Because at this point, the gesso in the first layer has sealed off my porous surface, which allows the second coat to float a little bit, to stay wet a little bit longer, which is going to allow me to smooth out the brush strokes a little more effectively and apply the gesso much faster. So you can immediately see the benefits of having a prepared painting surface just by preparing a painting surface. Let's do that. Okay. Everybody, if you're using a cheaper gesso brush and you're noticing that little hairs are falling out, make sure that you keep track of those little hairs, take them out immediately before they dry to the surface. Otherwise, you're going to have to sand your surface, and I can show you how to do that, but look, better just to practice preparing surfaces smooth from the beginning. Okay, that's layer 2. Let this dry. When we come back, we're going to apply a third coat. Okay, our second coat is dry. Let's apply a third coat. This time, which way did I go? I went vertical, I went diagonal. Now let's go horizontal. Why is it important to apply coats in 3 different directions? To break up the direction of the texture, to create something smoother. And you can see that that third coat, I'm able to spread it out a lot thinner. I'm able to move the paint around much more effectively. And I think I have just enough gesso to cover this board. I may have underestimated the amount a little bit. Nope, I think I just got it exactly right. Look, mix up 4 tablespoons as opposed to 3. Or 2, I don't know what I told you. I think I said 2, so mix up 3. Just so you have a little bit of extra. Okay, but this is just enough gesso, no waste. I don't like waste. Okay, now you may notice, especially once the board is dry, that it'll start to warp a little bit. So you can see here that there's a little bit of curvature to it. Let's find a good camera angle. The way to solve that is to apply a thin coat of gesso on the back. If that doesn't bother you, then don't do it. Right? If it does, then go ahead and apply a third coat. Just make sure you remember which side has 3 coats and which side has only 1. So you're painting on the correct side. Why 3 coats? Because 3 is the recommended number by the technicians at Golden, who have done lots of studies. It's not Golden. Where is Golden? Golden. They have a technical department with chemists, experts on materials, and they test these things. So they've discovered that 3 surfaces of gesso is the appropriate amount to limit the absorbency of the porous surface you're working on. By the way, the Golden website, if you go on it, is going to have lots and lots of technical information on everything, on the nature of different pigments, different art materials. They're very good about that, and they can actually answer a lot of your technical questions. Okay, I'm going to put a coat on the back just to even this out a little bit, let this dry, and then when I'm done, I'm going to tape it off and show you the next step. Here's my completed painting surface with 3 coats, each one a different direction. I also, to even out the surface tension on both sides and prevent the cardboard from curling, gessoed the other side with just a thin layer of diluted gesso. Just whatever I had left, I added a little bit of water to thin it out. This way, there's not going to be any confusion between the gessoed side and the side that I just covered lightly. Next step is to measure out a 1/2 inch border all the way around and tape the painting surface to my drawing board. So let's do that. Let's see, what should I use? Okay. Whenever you're taping off a border, make sure it's straight, because once the tape comes off, you're going to have a border all the way around, and nothing looks worse than a crooked border. So please do that. Everybody, presentation is a big part of art making. So even if you do an excellent work of art, if it's on some kind of crappy surface or it's in a bad frame, it's going to damage the appearance of your work. And it's going to be a darn shame, because really, you know, you spent a lot of time on it. Why ruin it with a crooked frame, a crooked border, or some kind of ugly frame? Okay, so got a 1/2 inch. all the way around. Now I'm going to tape this off, tape it down to my drawing board. Let's do that. Should probably make sure that's straight, but I don't know if that's going to matter all that much. Okay. Okay, I believe I am ready to paint. By the way, this method of preparation, 3 coats of gesso, each one a different direction, is what you use for really any porous surface. So you can potentially, besides using paper or cardboard, go to the hardware store and get yourself a big sheet of masonite and have it cut down to whatever size you want. This one actually has special priming designed for oil painting, but it's a piece of masonite. This is really cheap and pretty sturdy, and when the masonite gets this thick, it doesn't need a coat on the back. It's going to stay straight. Or you can, if you're doing a longer project and you want something that's kind of nice, that hangs on the wall without a frame, you can buy one of these cradled panels, cradled meaning that it has a support in the back, and do the same thing with it, right? 3 coats of gesso, each one a different direction, and they'll be ready to go. Sometimes you can buy a surface that's pre-primed, so let's say a canvas panel or a canvas that already has some kind of priming on it. In that case, the only thing you need to do is just get rid of the white surface, and also the fact that, you know, on most of those pre-gessoed surfaces, the gesso is kind of crappy. It's kind of slick. The paint doesn't stick to it terribly well. So in that case, it already has gesso on it. It's already non-porous, so you can just apply 1 coat of gesso just to tone the ground, basically. And I'll show you a number of different ways of preparing surfaces, but that'll come later. Okay, now that we've got this prepared, let's do a few really simple exercises to get us accustomed to using acrylic paint.